This question wants us to support a idea advanced by these people. These, in my opinion, tend to be some of the more complicated passages on the SAT. So as we go through, first of all, make sure that you see the word support, because sometimes it says weaken or undermine, and that completely changes our answer. But more importantly, as we're reading, we just kind of want to focus on what is the idea that they're advancing, right? They're going to give me some background information. Maybe that's useful in understanding things, but like really focus up when they talk about what these people's idea is. So let's do that. As media consumption has become increasingly multi-platform and socially mediated, active news acquisition has diminished in favor of an attitude known as news finds me, in which people passively rely on their social networks and ambient media environments for information about current events. Yeah, it's a harder passage. Like just that sentence is really hard to follow. But it's okay. We haven't gotten to what these people think. Homero Gil de Zuniga and Trevor Deal examined data on a representative group of adults in the United States to determine participants' strength of NFM attitude, political knowledge, and political interest. Although no major election took place sufficiently near the study, so that seems bad, for Gil and these people to identify causality between NFM and voting behavior, they did posit means hypothesize, that NFM may reduce voting probability through an indirect effect. So NFM reduces voting through an indirect effect. So I could dumb summarize here, but basically they're doing it for me, right? They want their idea, right? Their idea is that NFM, which is the news finds me, is going to reduce voting through an indirect effect. So if I wanted to, NFM leads to reduced voting, but there's something indirect, right? So in fact, I remember how I did this before. There's some sort of X factor here, right? Meaning we are reducing voting, but there's something in the middle that we haven't known. There's some indirect effect. The NFM is doing something else. So let's just see what we get from these choices. A, NFM attitude tends to increase in strength as major elections approach, and people are significantly more likely to vote in major elections than in minor elections. Whoa, this is just bringing in random things. Major versus minor elections. I mean, I'm all for the comparison because maybe they're saying like, okay, if we increase it at the NFM, something's going to happen to voting. First of all, this seems to maybe say the opposite, that we're increasing NFM and then that makes us more likely to vote. So that seems opposite. But also, did they talk about major versus minor elections? I don't even know what that means, right? So this is a good example of this. They're bringing in different variables that were never mentioned in the passage. So you can go back and check, but they're not there. They're not talking about the different elections. B, NFM attitude is a strong negative effect on political knowledge and interest, and there is known to be a strong positive correlation between political knowledge and interest and the likelihood of voting. Most of you are not going to understand this. So, let's leave it for now. Let's leave it like probably the way you would, and then we'll come back to it. But it does seem to have to do with voting and NFM, so maybe. C, political interest is known to have a strong positive effect on likelihood of voting, but shows only a weak positive effect on political knowledge, and NFM attitude shows little correlation with either political knowledge or political interest. So the problem here is if NFM has little correlation with anything, then what is this choice doing here, right? Because the whole point of their hypothesis is that NFM does something. It has an effect. So if, I don't know about the first part of this choice, but the second part of this answer choice says that NFM has little correlation, meaning little effect, little impact on these other things. Now, I know that they're not voting, but like, it seems like we want to say that NFM has some sort of effect if that's what the passage is saying. So like, I don't necessarily fully understand this choice, but I kind of feel like I'm missing the thing that I do understand needs to be in there based on what the passage says. The end of the passage to me is really clear. Let's look at D. The likelihood of voting increases as political knowledge increases, and the relationship between NFM attitude and political knowledge tends to strengthen as the size of people's social networks increases. Well, that part, I don't remember that they were talking about the social network increasing or decreasing, right? People rely on their social network, but it doesn't say anything about the size of that network and how that affects things. So that makes me suspicious. So look, here's where some of you are going to just kind of pick something like D because maybe you got rid of everything else, you don't understand D, and that feels safest. But to me, I'd be like, well, I didn't bother understanding B, but like, I know all these other choices have really big problems that are noticeable. So I'd probably just pick B and move on. Now let's try to prove B, because I think this is getting to a skill that I need to make a lesson on, but is also more and more like important on the SAT, is basically understanding these correlations. So let me show you here what they're saying with this choice B. NFM attitude is a strong negative effect on political knowledge. Okay, so NFM attitude, meaning if we increase NFM and it has a negative effect, then that means it's going to decrease the knowledge and interest, right? So K and I, knowledge and interest, right? Negative effect means one goes up, the other goes down, right? That's what that means. You should know what this means, is my point. And there is known to be a strong positive correlation, so another one of these weird phrases, between political knowledge and interest, so what we just wrote, and the likelihood of voting. Meaning, not that voting goes up, okay? It means that voting goes down. Because if it's a positive correlation, it means that they go in the same direction, right? They move the same. So it could, like in this case, be a positive correlation in that both go down, right? And I'm doing that because it kind of lets me connect all three of the pieces here, right? I could have written that separately and said, oh, okay, as knowledge and interest goes up, so does voting. That's another positive correlation, right? They both go together. But that doesn't really help me because I want to connect it back to the NFM. And what they're saying is NFM and knowledge and interest have a negative correlation, right? They go in different directions. So I want to keep everything kind of all connected. And now I see what I wanted, right? I see that the down in voting and the up in NFM matches this summary, right? And then there was that X factor, right? That was an indirect effect. So choice B is giving me that indirect effect. It's affecting the knowledge and interest, which is then affecting the voting, right? So the passage didn't tell me what that indirect effect is, but this is something that happens with these support questions, is that kind of like with the logic questions, the inference questions where we end in a blank. Here, we might need to bring in a new piece of information, and that's the point, is it supports what they've already said. So it's new, but it's not that new. It's still related to what they were saying in there. So these can be very difficult. To go back a little bit here, yeah, you may want to see, even in the beginning here, that they were doing the same thing. As media consumption has become increasingly multi-platform and socially mediated, active news acquisition has diminished in favor of an attitude known as news finds me. They're kind of using things here. They don't end up mattering, but we have a similar thing that maybe would have given you some confidence as you were going through this, right? So as, as we increase the socials, I guess, we increase the news finds me thing. That's kind of what they're saying, right? It has it's increasingly platform, and that is news acquisition has diminished. So there's two things going on. So a diminishment of acquisition, right? Like I don't think this matters, but it just goes to show that when you read sentences like this, you might want to make these like little ups and downs here, because that can help you just be like, all right, I know what I'm going to look for in the answer choice because I can just compare arrows, right? It's hard to hold all these ideas in your brain. So many of you get a lot of questions wrong, in my opinion, on the reading section because you don't use your scratch paper. This is a question where you should use your scratch paper. I would have used it. You need to be using it too.